My guest today is the preeminent harpsichordist Mahan Esfahani. He's just released a new recording of Johann Sebastian Bach's monumental Well-Tempered Clavier on the Hyperion label. Written nearly 300 years ago, this collection of preludes and fugues in every key has become one of the cornerstones of Western classical music. Welcome, Mahan, to FM 91.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Now, when most people think of the harpsichord, if they're not classically oriented, they think of like the Addams Family or something like
Uh-huh.
that. What got you interested in the harpsichord in the first place?
I guess since I wasn't surrounded by those kinds of people. No, I'll tell you what it is. It's I just heard it. I mean, I played the piano for a long time, and I guess the first time I heard it, I thought, what on earth is this? I've got to get my hands on one of these.
Mm.
And, so I spent a lot of time sort of fantasizing about how I was ever going to get my hands on one. And once I did, it's been a love affair that just hasn't ended. That's what it's been. And it excites me immeasurably. I think it's the instrument I play because I feel expressive on the harpsichord.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Now the harpsichord, you mentioned that you're a pianist or you have been a
I,
pianist.
I was, yeah.
Yeah, so you're favoring the harpsichord now in your career. I wonder if you have the same problems that pianists have of playing on different instruments, different places, because it's too big to travel.
Well, I would say they're very different problems. I mean, harpsichords are not standardized instruments, so we have very different kinds of instruments. There was a school of harpsichord playing that very much took sort of piano technology on and sort of created a hybrid instrument that was used a lot for modern music. I love those instruments. I have one myself. But then, in the 1960s, there was a lot of talk about actually reproducing instruments of the 17th and 18th centuries and sort of I think trying to understand what they tell us about the music.
Yeah.
And while we're on that, I mean, I don't play the harpsichord because I think there's some sort of like historic probity to what it does. I don't think that it has some sort of moral superiority to the piano. No, quite the contrary. I love the piano, especially when other people play it.
Mm.
Um, but I play it because I think that expressively I can find different things on it. And I think that an instrument that someone like Bach chose to wrote for cannot have been an inferior instrument. Um, but that's a big discussion.
Yeah. Let's talk about your album, Book One of the Well-Tempered
Yes, book
Clavier.
one of two. That's right.
Yes. For people who don't know, maybe you can give us a rundown of what it is and what it's about.
Certainly. So this is book one, which is 1722. So actually, it's 303 years old, and Bach sought to show that all 12 keys, which is to say all the chromatic scale. Now we think there's 8 notes, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. But actually it's C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and so on. And to show that you could divide the scale in such a way where each key is actually different from the other ones, but like each of them is pleasant and interesting in its own way, and that you could write music for all 12 of these keys in the major and in the minor form. Now that sounds like a very like what's so great about that? But actually, I think what he's saying is that, we use science and mathematics to figure this out, but ultimately science and mathematics make us more expressive. And I think that's something, many of your listeners will think like, oh, Bach is not expressive or there's a lot of rules with Bach. But, Bach is what we know of his life and certainly his belief system, his value system is Bach is a person of of deep expressivity. He is a person who feels that with music he can confront his his sort of deepest quandaries in life. That would seem, therefore to mitigate against the notion that sort of Bach is music that exists before real music. That it's music that exists before expressive music. Quite the contrary. Bach is Bach comes from a time where they think music has the power to change people's lives, and has the power to sort of move men and nations. And I think even a work for solo keyboard has that extraordinary power.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, and you've released this recording, which is part of a larger project, yeah, that you're doing for Hyperion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the good guys at Hyperion, they really are good guys. They basically from 2015, I was told if you want to record all the keyboard works of Bach, every last note, every last fugue and little fantasy and invention and you name it, go ahead and do it. Now funny enough, I started at Hyperion in 2014. I was for about a year and a half at Deutsche Grammophon, which is part of Universal, and then I came back to Hyperion. And when I was at Deutsche Grammophon, I recorded the Goldberg Variations. Funny enough, Hyperion now is part of the Universal family, so I don't have to do that again, at least not for the time being. And then when I came back to Hyperion, I did the toccatas, and then I did, oh golly, what did I do? I did the partitas, which is first part of Clavier Reborn. I did the second part of Clavier Reborn, which is the Italian Concerto, French Overture. I did the French suites. I did the Inventions and Symphonias. I did the Notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach, which a lot of people think is children's music, but it's magnificent music. Um, and so, I've been going through it now. I've done the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is the, first half of a sort of big enchilada that is completed with the second book, which was written 22 years later. And I'm not going to record that in 22 years. I'll record that in like 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
And my one of my great teachers, which is a fellow named Peter Watchorn, who's a really wonderful person, said to me that if you can play both books of the Well-Tempered Clavier, then I think we can convincingly say that I taught you how to play the harpsichord.
I wonder when you sit down to play, how do you make this your own? Would you change like tempos or stops? I mean, how do you use that instrument?
Well, we don't know, of course, how it originally sounded. I mean,
Yeah.
um, there are people who claim we know how music of the past sounded, but in reality, we really don't. And I think it's a philosophically indefensible position. I mean, nonetheless, it is worth trying to find out.
Yeah.
If you take the sort of view of like Aquinas or someone that like there's a discrete amount of knowledge that that awaits eternity to be uncovered, then like maybe we will uncover it. Part of me says like that doesn't matter in a sense. I don't know if it's about making it my own. I think that's a sort of would be a very solipsistic take on the music.
Yeah.
But I would say that I can share, when I play a concert, when I do a recording, my aim is for you to feel about the music the way that I do, right? And for you to see why have I bothered with this music. If you come away from the performance feeling that something resonated with you, that's a good thing. And, ultimately, that means, we do have a great reception history of this music. There's many great pianists who've played this music, since the last 200, years. And why not also engage with those interpretations? One of the people I consulted, I mean, not personally because he's dead, but his writings that I consulted in studying the Well-Tempered Clavier for my whole life, and I've been looking at it for 30 years, are the commentaries of Busoni. Busoni, the great pianist. Now you would think, well, what the heck would Busoni have to say about Bach? Busoni has a great deal to say about Bach.
Mm.
You may not agree with his conclusions, but Busoni's a great genius. We know that Beethoven played the Well-Tempered Clavier. Czerny, in his edition, discussed or tried to show the way Beethoven played it. I have to say, I find some of Czerny's conclusions a little difficult to take seriously, but like nonetheless, it represents a certain stage in the history of this music. And I think what we are fundamentally asking when we I think it's really indefensible to ask people to respond to music, but then to tell them that everything that happened between the creation of music and now is irrelevant. Forget that and only respond to me now. I think that is the height of solipsism, actually. I think it's the height of arrogance. And I think, especially with Bach, our feelings about the music, for better or worse, are shaped by performance traditions. And in fact, I'll even go further. Occasionally, because unfortunately I'm that kind of guy, I provoke a conversation with those traditions. I refute some of those traditions. I play on them. In the case of the harpsichord, obviously there's different colors that we work with, but I mean, I think all of Bach's music for the harpsichord is posing a very serious question, which is, if I'm expressive in every other aspect of my life, this is Bach speaking, right? Writing passions, cantatas, organ music, all this amazing orchestral music. Can that same expressivity apply to the harp, to the keyboard? And I think the answer is yes. J.S. Bach, C.P. Bach, his sons, all their relatives. One thing that really sets the Bachs apart from their contemporaries is that they're all great keyboardists. So there must be something there. And why would they bother with instruments that sort of were lacking? That doesn't sort of compute at all. And I have found, in my experience, and now I guess I've been a performer on harpsichord for about 20 years, I have found most people are open to hear new expressive possibilities. I mean, except for people who call themselves the world of early music. They're closed. They're the absolutely most closed-minded people in the world. But people who have open hearts to all kinds of music, believe me, they have openness to hearing everything that Bach has to tell us.
Yeah. You mentioned various composers and your mentor. I wonder if you have other harpsichord players who are heroes to you or people that
Certainly.
you're interested in.
Well, look, Wanda Landowska. I mean, who is she not a hero for? I mean, she's the first great concert harpsichordist, early part of the 20th century. We have many of her great recordings from the 1930s, 1940s. She recorded the Well-Tempered Clavier actually toward the end of her life in the early 1950s. There's Ralph Kirkpatrick, who was the great American harpsichordist, who sort of represents the beginnings of this turning back to the period instruments and understanding what they're telling us. There was my great teacher, Zuzana Růžičková, of course, they're in the Czech Republic. There was my teacher, Peter Watchorn. I very, very much appreciate the work of, Gustav Leonhardt. I don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions, but I mean, Gustav Leonhardt was an important figure for the harpsichord, and I think for allowing the harpsichord to speak on its own terms. We have figures like Toon Koopman from the Netherlands, also a great organist, great conductor, someone I respect hugely. There is Christophe Rousset in France. Trevor Pinnock was a big sort of influence for me, also because he's just a really nice person. Trevor's a really lovely person. So, I think the harpsichord is in good hands and it has a good future. My own feeling is that I'm here to engage with the here and now, which is why I commission a lot of new music and I play a lot of new and experimental music. So, Bach is part of what I do, but I think that, for the harpsichord to really have a serious claim on what music means, it needs to engage with what's here now.
Yeah.
And I think ignoring the present is just not on.
Yeah. Tell
Yeah.
us about your harpsichord that you used on this recording.
I wish this were my harpsichord. This is a harpsichord owned by a close friend of mine. And it was built by Hugh Saunders of London, who's also a very good friend of mine. And it's a copy of an early 18th century instrument that we believe may have come from the estate of Johann Sebastian Bach. We don't really know. It was built by a builder in Thüringen, which is the region of the German-speaking world that Bach grew up in. And we don't really know, but I think it's worth trying to at least imagine what were the sounds that someone like Bach would have been used to. And the truth is I just really love this instrument. I also recorded the Goldberg variations on it. And then before I was about to do the Well-Tempered Clavier, it was restrung like about 3 months before. And string players will know restringing an instrument totally changes everything about it. And it's really funny. It got restrung. And then about a week before the recording, I had my ears were blocked the worst they've ever, like I couldn't hear a thing. And I panicked. And funny enough, the person who owns this harpsichord, because I was supposed to spend time with it because now it sounds totally different. She's also a doctor. And so I called her in a panic and I was like, what do I do? What am I gonna do? And I was in London and she said, oh, I'm gonna call my friend. He's the head of the Royal Society for Audiologists. And he saw me at the last minute and cleaned out my ears. And I don't want to tell you what was in there. And so I was able to hear very clearly. And so she really saved this recording. So I have a very personal relationship with this instrument.
Well, there are a lot of stories that we could dive into, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll be sure to link to the recording of the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1 on our website, and we'll play it on the air. So thank you
you.
for all the time and the music.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right, take
All right.
care.
Yeah.